The greatest miracles rarely begin with applause. They begin when one ordinary person refuses to drive away. The rain fell in endless silver sheets across the empty highway leading into Cedar Ridge, Colorado, washing the mountain roads until they shimmered beneath the glow of scattered streetlights. Ethan Brooks tightened both hands around the steering wheel of his aging Ford pickup as the dashboard clock blinked 11:38 p.m. Another 14-hour workday had finally ended. His shoulders ached from lifting engines, changing tires, and crawling beneath trucks that had seen better decades. But his thoughts were already waiting at home where his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, was sleeping beneath the quilt they had sewn together after her mother passed away 4 years earlier. Every exhausting day ended with the same promise echoing inside his heart. No matter how difficult life became, Lily would always grow up believing kindness mattered more than comfort. Character mattered more than money, and helping another human being was never a mistake. As Ethan rounded the final curve before town, his headlights caught movement near an abandoned bus shelter standing alone beside the rain-soaked road. At first he assumed it was nothing more than wind pushing an old coat across the pavement. Then the figure slowly lifted her head. A young woman sat trembling on the weathered bench, soaked by the storm, one shoe missing, her cream-colored sweater stained by mud and rainwater. Her blonde hair clung to her face while she struggled to remain awake. Several passing vehicles sprayed water across the shoulder without slowing down. One expensive sports car accelerated as though she did not exist. Ethan felt his foot ease from the accelerator. He could keep driving. Most people already had. No one would blame him. It was nearly midnight, and bringing home a stranger was not something responsible fathers usually did. Yet every instinct told him that leaving her there would haunt him far longer than being late. He quietly pulled onto the shoulder, reached behind the seat for the emergency blanket he always carried during Colorado winters, and stepped into the cold rain. "Ma'am," he called gently, keeping a respectful distance. "Are you all right?" The young woman looked up with tired blue eyes clouded by confusion instead of fear. She tried to stand, but her legs failed beneath her almost immediately. Embarrassment crossed her face before she whispered, I think I made every wrong decision tonight." Ethan wrapped the blanket around her shoulders without asking another question. "Then tonight doesn't have to end with another one," he answered calmly. She looked at him as though waiting for suspicion, judgment, or demands. None came. Instead, he opened the passenger door of his truck and turned the heater to its highest setting before handing her a bottle of water from the center console. She hesitated for several seconds. "You do not even know who I am," she murmured. Ethan smiled softly while climbing back behind the wheel. Nobody has to earn the right to be safe. The truck rolled quietly back onto the empty highway as rain continued falling against the windshield. Neither of them noticed the electronic highway sign several miles behind them, flashing an emergency bulletin that had just interrupted broadcasts across America. One of the country's most powerful female billionaire chief executive officers had reported her only daughter missing. And before the sun rose over the Rocky Mountains, every television station, every police department, and millions of people would begin searching for the young woman now sitting silently beside a struggling single father who believed he had simply chosen kindness over convenience. Morning arrived quietly over Cedar Ridge as sunlight filtered through the tall pine trees and settled gently across the small farmhouse where Ethan Brooks had built a life out of patience instead of comfort. The smell of freshly brewed coffee drifted through the kitchen while pancakes browned on an old cast-iron skillet that had belonged to his late wife. Ethan had already packed Lily's school lunch, folded clean laundry, and checked the weather forecast before the rest of the house stirred awake. His days always began long before sunrise, because being both father and mother left very little room for rest. Upstairs, the young woman slowly opened her eyes, blinking against the warm morning light that spilled through lace curtains she had never seen before. She stared at the wooden ceiling in silence, trying to remember where she was. Fragments of the previous night returned one by one. The rain, the empty bus stop, the stranger with kind eyes, the warm truck, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She sat up carefully, surprised to discover neatly folded dry clothes waiting on the chair beside the bed, along with a handwritten note that simply read, "Take your time. Breakfast is downstairs whenever you are ready." She could not remember the last time someone had offered kindness without expecting something in return. After changing into the borrowed clothes, she stepped quietly into the hallway, where she nearly bumped into a cheerful little girl carrying a stack of pancakes almost too large for her small hands. The child smiled immediately. "Good morning. Daddy said you might still be tired." The young woman hesitated before smiling back. "Your daddy says that a lot, does he?" Lily giggled. "He says everybody deserves breakfast before questions." Those words lingered in the young woman's heart as she followed the little girl downstairs. Ethan looked up from the stove and offered the same calm smile he had worn the night before. "Good morning. Coffee is fresh if you drink it. Orange juice is in the refrigerator if you do not." She sat cautiously at the old wooden table, expecting questions about her name, her family, or why she had been sitting alone in the rain. None came. Ethan simply placed a warm plate of pancakes in front of her before returning to the stove. Finally, she broke the silence herself. "You never asked who I am." Ethan shrugged gently. "You look like someone who needed rest more than conversation." She lowered her eyes, almost embarrassed by such uncomplicated kindness. Most people would have wanted an explanation. Ethan poured maple syrup onto Lily's pancakes before answering quietly. "Sometimes people have reasons they are not ready to share. That does not mean they deserve less respect." The kitchen fell peacefully silent except for the sound of forks touching ceramic plates and birds singing outside the open window. Family photographs covered the refrigerator, children's drawings decorated the walls, and sunlight warmed every corner of the modest home. There was nothing luxurious inside the farmhouse, yet everything felt genuine. For reasons she could not explain, the young woman found herself relaxing for the first time in many years. She did not realize that while she shared breakfast with an ordinary father and his daughter, television stations across America were interrupting their morning broadcasts with breaking news announcing that the missing daughter of one of the nation's most powerful female chief executive officers had still not been found. After breakfast, Ethan walked Lily to the end of the gravel driveway, where the little yellow school bus stopped every weekday at exactly 8 o'clock. Lily hugged him tightly before climbing aboard, then pressed her hand against the window until the bus disappeared around the bend. Ethan smiled as he watched it leave, knowing those few quiet seconds every morning reminded his daughter that no matter how busy life became, she would never wonder whether her father was there for her. When he returned inside, he found the young woman standing beside the kitchen sink, carefully washing the breakfast dishes. Sunlight reflected across the warm water while birds sang outside the open window. Ethan leaned against the doorway with an amused smile. "You really do not have to do that." She glanced back without stopping. "Maybe I want to." He nodded once. Fair enough. Neither of them realized how unusual that silence had become. She had spent years surrounded by conversations filled with schedules, negotiations, expectations, and constant pressure. Here, silence simply meant peace. Hundreds of miles away, however, peace no longer existed. Television anchors interrupted their regular programming for the third time that morning. Every major news network displayed the same photograph beneath bright red banners announcing an urgent nationwide search. Olivia Hayes, the 27-year-old daughter of Hayes Global founder and Billionaire chief executive officer. Victoria Hayes had disappeared after leaving a private charity event the previous evening. Social media platforms exploded with speculation. News helicopters circled company headquarters in New York City. Financial analysts debated whether the disappearance might affect one of the largest corporate mergers in recent history. Victoria Hayes personally announced a $2 million reward for verified information leading directly to her daughter's safe return. Across America, millions of people stared at Olivia's smiling photograph. Inside Ethan's farmhouse, no one saw it. The old television in the living room had stopped working several weeks earlier, and Ethan had not bothered replacing it because most evenings were spent helping Lily with homework instead of watching the news. His cracked cell phone rested face down on the kitchen counter with the sound turned off while he organized repair invoices for the garage. The young woman quietly dried the last plate before looking toward him. "Do you always live like this?" she asked. Ethan looked up from the paperwork. "Like what?" She searched for the right words. "Slow. Peaceful. As though nothing outside these mountains can reach you." Ethan smiled gently. "The world moves fast enough without me helping it." She looked around the small kitchen once again. There was no expensive artwork, no marble floors, no luxury furniture. Yet somehow the house felt richer than places she had lived her entire life. Ethan picked up his truck keys and slipped them into his pocket. "I need to open the garage. You are welcome to stay here and rest if you want." She hesitated only a moment before answering. "Would you mind if I came with you?" "Not at all," Ethan replied. Fresh mountain air fixes more than people realize. As they climbed into the old pickup and drove toward Brooks Auto and Towing, neither of them noticed two discreet private investigators parked several blocks away inside an unmarked sport utility vehicle. One investigator compared the young woman's face through a telephoto camera with a missing person bulletin displayed on a secure tablet. After several long seconds, he quietly lowered the device and spoke into his radio. "We have a possible visual confirmation. She appears safe. Follow at a distance. Notify headquarters immediately." Brooks Auto and Towing sat beside the Tulane Highway, just outside Cedar Ridge, its faded wooden sign gently swaying in the cool mountain breeze as Ethan unlocked the garage doors. The familiar scent of motor oil, fresh-cut pine, and old steel filled the morning air while sunlight poured through the open bays. The young woman stepped quietly from the pickup truck, looking around with genuine curiosity. There are no polished marble floors, no spotless executive offices, and no luxury vehicles waiting for service. Instead, there are aging pickup trucks, hardworking ranchers, family sedans, and neighbors greeting one another by name. Ethan picked up his toolbox and smiled. "Welcome to the busiest little garage in Colorado." She smiled for the first time that morning. "It feels different." Ethan laughed softly. That usually means something is about to break. Before she could answer, an elderly couple slowly pulled into the driveway in a weathered station wagon that rattled with every movement. The husband stepped out, looking worried, while his wife remained seated inside the car. "Morning, Ethan," the older man called. "I think the alternator finally gave up." Ethan opened the hood, examined the engine for only a few moments, then nodded reassuringly. "Nothing we cannot fix." The older gentleman sighed with relief before quietly admitting, "I just hope it does not cost more than we can manage this month." Ethan reached toward a shelf inside the garage and pulled down a rebuilt alternator still in excellent condition. "I have one that will work perfectly," he said. "You can have it cost. No reason to pay for a brand new one when this one still has plenty of life left." The couple exchanged grateful smiles, and the young woman watched the conversation with growing disbelief. When the customers finally drove away, she turned toward Ethan. "You could have charged full price." Ethan wiped his hands on an old shop towel before answering. "I could have. Then why did you not?" He looked toward the highway where the station wagon disappeared into the distance. "Because they needed a mechanic more than they needed another bill." His answer was so simple that she found herself unable to respond. A short time later, another customer hurried into the garage, carrying delivery paperwork and wearing the anxious expression of someone already running late. "Ethan, I forgot my wallet at home," the young man admitted. "Can I pay you tomorrow?" Ethan handed him the repair truck keys without hesitation. "Your customers are waiting. We will settle it later." The driver blinked with surprise. "You trust me?" Ethan smiled. "Trust has to begin somewhere." The young woman quietly followed Ethan outside while he cleaned his tools beneath the bright Colorado sky. "You really believe everyone deserves that much faith?" she asked. Ethan rested both hands on the workbench and looked toward the mountains rising beyond town. "Not everyone earns it," he answered. "But sometimes people become better simply because somebody believed they could." His words settled deep inside her heart. She had spent years surrounded by people who measured every decision by contracts, profit margins, and public image. This man measured success by entirely different standards. Across the street, inside an unmarked sport utility vehicle parked beneath a row of pine trees, two private investigators observed the garage through tinted windows. One quietly photographed the young woman speaking with Ethan, while the other transmitted the images to New York. Only moments later, inside the executive offices of Hayes Global, Victoria Hayes stared silently at the photographs arriving on her tablet. Relief washed across her face when she saw her daughter smiling, but it was quickly replaced by determination. Closing the tablet, she stood and looked toward her waiting security director. "Prepare the convoy," she said calmly. "It is time for me to meet the man who reminded my daughter how kindness feels." By late afternoon, the sun hung low above the Rocky Mountains, bathing Cedar Ridge in warm amber light as Ethan locked the garage after another honest day's work. The young woman stood beside him, holding 2 paper cups of coffee she had quietly purchased from the diner across the street while he finished helping his last customer. She handed him one with a shy smile. "I figure mechanics probably need coffee as much as lawyers." Ethan laughed softly. "Some days, even more." They stood together for a few peaceful moments, watching traffic drift past the small town, neither of them noticing the pair of discreet black sport utility vehicles parked nearly a block away. Inside, professional investigators watched through tinted windows, careful to remain unnoticed. Their reports had already confirmed everything they had seen since morning. The missing young woman appeared calm, healthy, and completely free to leave whenever she wished. Even so, their instructions remained unchanged. Observe, protect, wait for the chief executive officer to arrive. Ethan glanced toward the sky before checking his watch. "We should pick Lily up from her after-school program." The young woman smiled. "I would like that." A few minutes later, the old pickup rolled into the elementary school parking lot, where children laughed across the playground beneath the golden evening sun. The moment Lily spotted Ethan, she ran toward him with a backpack bouncing against her shoulders before stopping beside the young woman with the effortless curiosity only children possess. "You came back," Lily said happily. The young woman nodded. "I guess I did." Lily reached into her backpack and proudly pulled out a folded sheet of construction paper. "I made this today." She opened the drawing to reveal 3 smiling stick figures holding hands beside a tiny farmhouse beneath a bright yellow sun. Across the top, she had carefully written, "Our new friend." The young woman felt her throat tighten. She had received expensive paintings, designer gifts, and rare collectibles throughout her life, yet nothing had ever carried the simple sincerity of that drawing. "May I keep it?" she asked quietly. Lily smiled so brightly that Ethan could not help smiling too. "That means she really likes you," he said. As they drove home, Ethan stopped at the neighborhood grocery store. He carefully compared prices before placing eggs, milk, bread, fresh vegetables, and a small container of chocolate ice cream into the shopping cart. The young woman noticed him calculating every dollar before reaching into her purse. "Please let me pay," she offered gently. Ethan shook his head with a grateful smile. "You are my guest, but you have already done so much." Ethan placed the groceries onto the checkout counter before answering. Kindness stops being kindness the moment it comes with a receipt. She quietly lowered her hand, realizing she had never met anyone who lived exactly the way he spoke. As the pickup turned onto the gravel road leading toward the farmhouse, the peaceful evening suddenly felt different. Far ahead, sunlight reflected across polished black vehicles parked neatly beside the property. More arrived every few moments, their headlights catching the dust rising from the road. Curious neighbors stepped onto front porches, whispering quietly as the unusual convoy continued growing outside Ethan's modest home. Ethan slowed the truck, confusion crossing his face for the first time all day. The young woman recognized the lead vehicle immediately, and the color slowly drained from her face. She whispered, almost to herself, "My mother is here." Ethan looked at her with quiet surprise, still unaware that within the next few minutes the ordinary life he had spent years protecting would meet one of the most powerful families in America. The old pickup truck rolled to a gentle stop as silence settled over the gravel driveway. One by one, The polished black sport utility vehicles stood motionless beneath the fading Colorado sky, their dark windows reflecting the warm light of sunset. Curious neighbors watched from their porches, whispering to one another as they tried to understand why such an impressive convoy had arrived outside the modest farmhouse of the town's hardworking mechanic. Ethan switched off the engine and stepped out first, instinctively opening Lily's door before helping her climb down. The young woman remained seated for a brief moment, her hands resting quietly in her lap as she recognized every vehicle waiting in front of her. She closed her eyes, took a slow breath, and finally stepped onto the gravel beside Ethan. At that exact moment, the rear door of the lead vehicle opened. Victoria Hayes emerged with calm dignity, dressed in an elegant navy coat that reflected the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to leading one of the largest corporations in America. Behind her, members of her executive security team remained respectfully several steps back, careful not to interfere. The moment Victoria saw her daughter standing safely beneath the porch light, relief softened her face before years of discipline restored her composed expression. "Olivia," she said quietly. The young woman looked toward her mother with eyes filled not with fear, but with sadness. "Hello, Mother." Ethan glanced between them, suddenly understanding why the entire town had filled with unfamiliar vehicles. He looked toward the young woman with gentle surprise. "Your last name is Hayes?" She nodded slowly. "I'm sorry I never told you." Ethan smiled with quiet understanding. "You were never ready. That is all right." Victoria stepped forward until only a few feet separated them. Her attention shifted toward Ethan. "Are you Ethan Brooks?" "Yes, ma'am," he answered respectfully. "Thank you for helping my daughter." Ethan shook his head gently. Anyone should have done the same. Victoria looked at him carefully, but almost no one did. For several silent seconds, the evening air remained perfectly still. Then she asked the question that had followed her across hundreds of miles. "Did you know who she was?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "No." "Did you ask for money?" "No." "Did you ask about our family?" "No." Victoria studied his face, searching for even the smallest sign of dishonesty, but found only quiet sincerity. She turned toward Olivia. "Were you ever prevented from leaving?" Olivia immediately shook her head. "Never." "Then why did you stay?" The young woman looked toward the warmly lit farmhouse where Lily had already placed her colorful drawing against the front window. A soft smile crossed her face before she answered. "Because this was the first place in a very long time where someone cared whether I was safe before they cared who I was." The words settled over everyone standing. In the driveway, even the security professionals lowered their eyes. Victoria slowly looked back toward Ethan, and for the first time she noticed details no financial report could ever measure. The worn boots, the weathered hands, the tired face of a father who worked every day simply to give his daughter a peaceful life. Wealth had introduced her to powerful people all over the world, yet few had shown the quiet integrity standing before her now. Lily gently walked over to Olivia, slipped her small hand into hers, and smiled with complete innocence. "You can still have dinner with us if you want." Olivia smiled through grateful eyes before looking toward her mother. Victoria remained silent for a long moment. Then something inside her quietly changed. "If the invitation still stands," she said softly, "I would be honored to join you." Ethan opened the front door with the same calm smile he had offered a stranger on a rainy night. "There's always room for one more at our table." As warm light spilled across the porch and the four of them stepped inside together, the convoy, the headlines, and the unimaginable difference in their worlds suddenly seemed far less important than one ordinary home where kindness had quietly accomplished what power never could. The warm light inside the farmhouse wrapped itself around everyone like a quiet welcome as Ethan carried a pot of homemade chicken noodle soup to the center of the worn wooden table. The aroma of fresh herbs, baked bread, and roasted vegetables filled the small kitchen while Lily hurried from one chair to another, carefully placing silverware exactly where she believed it belonged. Victoria Hayes paused near the doorway, taking in details she had never expected to notice. Family photographs covered one wall. Children's drawings decorated the refrigerator. A pair of muddy work boots rested beside the back door. Nothing inside the house reflected extraordinary wealth, yet every corner reflected extraordinary care. Ethan smiled as he placed another bowl on the table. I hope simple food is all right. Victoria returned a quiet smile. It smells wonderful. They sat together without ceremony. Lily immediately began talking about her school science project, explaining with endless enthusiasm how she planned to build a model of the solar system using painted foam balls. Ethan listened with complete attention, asking questions that made his daughter laugh even harder. Olivia watched the exchange in silence, her eyes moving from father to daughter. She realized that during the entire meal, Ethan never glanced at a telephone, never checked a message, and never allowed anything to interrupt the conversation. His attention remained exactly where his heart was. Victoria noticed it as well. After dinner, Lily disappeared upstairs before returning with the colorful drawing she had made at school. She placed it in front of her mother with proud confidence. This is my favorite picture now. Victoria studied the drawing carefully. 3 smiling figures stood beside a little farmhouse beneath a bright yellow sun, and a 4th had been added later in bright blue crayon. Across the top, uneven letters spelled out the words, "Kind people stay together." Victoria gently touched the paper as though it were something priceless. Olivia looked toward her mother before quietly speaking. "Do you know why I stayed here?" Victoria lifted her eyes. "I think I am beginning to understand, but I would rather hear it from you." Olivia folded her hands together and took a slow breath. "I did not leave because I hated my life. I left because somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like your daughter and started feeling like another responsibility on your calendar. Every conversation became another meeting. Every family dinner became another business call. I knew you loved me, but I could not remember the last time I simply felt it." The room grew perfectly still. Victoria lowered her eyes, unable to deny a single word. Memories quietly returned. Missed birthdays because of international conferences. Vacations shortened by emergency board meetings. Promises delayed until tomorrow, then delayed again. She had always believed she was sacrificing time to build a better future for her daughter. She had never realized how much of the present had quietly disappeared. Ethan remained silent, giving both women the space they deserved. Finally, Victoria spoke, her voice softer than Olivia had heard in years. "I spent my whole life building a company that could survive anything, but I never stopped to ask whether my own family was surviving without me." Olivia reached across the table and gently held her mother's hand. "You are here now." Victoria looked at Ethan with deep gratitude. "Mr. Brooks, I believe success meant providing everything my daughter could ever need. You reminded her that what she needed most could never be purchased." Ethan smiled with his usual humility. Children remember who made them feel safe long after they forget who impressed them. Victoria nodded slowly as those words settled deep inside her heart. Outside, the last light faded beyond the mountains, while inside the little farmhouse, a mother and daughter quietly began rebuilding a relationship that years of success had nearly allowed to slip away, all because one ordinary father had chosen compassion on a rainy night instead of driving past a stranger. The following morning arrived beneath a clear blue Colorado sky, and for the first time in many years, Victoria Hayes allowed herself to wake without reaching for her telephone. Sunlight poured through the farmhouse windows while the scent of fresh coffee and cinnamon filled the kitchen. Ethan was already preparing breakfast, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who had repeated the same routine thousands of times. Lily sat at the table coloring another picture while Olivia stood beside Ethan, laughing softly as he patiently showed her how to flip pancakes without breaking them. The first attempt landed, folded in half. The second landed on the edge of the skillet. By the third attempt, everyone in the kitchen applauded as though she had accomplished something remarkable. Victoria watched from the doorway, smiling before she even realized she was smiling. In boardrooms, success had always been measured by contracts, quarterly reports, and stock prices. Inside this little farmhouse, success looked completely different. It sounded like laughter echoing through a modest kitchen. It looked like flour on someone's sweater and syrup on a little girl's cheek. It felt like time, shared instead of time managed. After breakfast, Ethan drove everyone into town because Lily wanted to visit the Saturday farmers market. The sidewalks were lined with local families greeting one another by name, while musicians played old country songs beneath colorful tents. Olivia wandered slowly between fruit stands, handmade crafts, and fresh flowers, amazed that so many people seemed genuinely happy without pretending to impress anyone. Every few steps, someone stopped Ethan simply to shake his hand or thank him for fixing a vehicle months earlier. An elderly rancher smiled warmly and said, "This town runs because men like you keep showing up every morning." Ethan accepted the compliment with quiet humility before changing the subject. Olivia noticed that he never seemed comfortable receiving praise, yet he never grew tired of helping others. Victoria noticed something else. People respected Ethan because of who he was when nobody important was watching. That kind of reputation could not be purchased, inherited, or manufactured through public relations. On the drive home, Lily fell asleep in the back seat holding Olivia's hand, refusing to let go even after closing her eyes. Olivia looked at the little girl and quietly whispered, "I forgot what this feels like." Victoria turned toward her daughter. "What?" Olivia smiled gently. "Belonging somewhere without having to earn it." Those words stayed with Victoria long after they returned to the farmhouse. That evening, as the sun settled behind the mountains, she found Ethan repairing an old wooden fence beside the barn. She walked over and stood beside him for a quiet moment before speaking. "Mr. Brooks, yesterday I thought I came here to bring my daughter home. Now I realize she found something here that I could not give her." Ethan rested the hammer against the fence post and looked across the peaceful valley glowing beneath the evening light. "Sometimes people do not need a different life," he answered softly. "Sometimes they simply need to know they matter more than the life they have been building." Victoria nodded slowly, understanding those words more deeply than she ever expected. She looked back toward the farmhouse where Olivia and Lily laughed together on the porch while chasing soap bubbles drifting through the warm summer air. For the first time in years, she made a decision that had nothing to do with business. She quietly canceled every meeting scheduled for the following week. Some opportunities could wait. A family finding its way back to one another could not. As the evening breeze carried the sound of joyful laughter across the fields, the little farmhouse no longer felt like a place where strangers had met. It had quietly become the place where four hearts had begun teaching one another what home was always meant to feel like. 3 months passed, and autumn painted the mountains surrounding Cedar Ridge in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Brooks' auto and towing looked different from the outside, yet somehow remained exactly the same at heart. New equipment filled the garage. Local apprentices worked alongside experienced mechanics, and several young trade students from nearby communities had received scholarships funded through a quiet partnership that carried no giant signs, no press conferences, and no publicity campaign. Victoria Hayes had insisted on one condition before supporting the project. Ethan Brooks would continue running the garage exactly as he always had, because the values that built it were far more valuable than anything money could add. Ethan agreed only after learning that every improvement would benefit the town just as much as his own business. Every morning, he still unlocked the same front door before sunrise. He still greeted every customer with the same warm smile. He still charged honest prices, repaired what truly needed repairing, and reminded every apprentice that a person's trust was worth more than the largest invoice. Olivia returned to Cedar Ridge almost every weekend. Sometimes she helped Lily with school projects. Sometimes she stood beside Ethan at the garage handing tools to young mechanics eager to learn. Other weekends, she simply sat on the farmhouse porch with her mother, watching the sunset without speaking because silence had finally become comfortable. Instead of awkward, Victoria changed as well. She no longer measured every hour by productivity alone. Meetings could be postponed. Earnings reports could wait until morning. She scheduled family dinners before business flights and learned that the strongest leadership often began by listening instead of speaking. One crisp October afternoon, the entire town gathered for the annual Harvest Festival. Children laughed beneath strings of golden lights, while local musicians filled the square with country songs. Ethan stood beside Lily as she proudly presented her science project, and Olivia cheered louder than anyone when Lily received first place. Victoria watched from a short distance with quiet gratitude. There was a time when she believed influence meant standing at the center of every important moment. Now she understood that real joy often came from standing just behind the people you loved and celebrating them instead. As the festival ended, the four of them walked slowly back toward the farmhouse beneath a sky overflowing with stars. Lily slipped one small hand into Ethan's and the other into Olivia's before looking back at Victoria with a bright smile. "I think families can grow," she said. "Do you?" Victoria smiled through grateful eyes. "Yes," she answered softly. "I think they can." When they reached the porch, Ethan paused for a moment and looked across the peaceful valley where lights from the little town shimmered in the distance. He remembered the cold, rainy night when he almost kept driving. One ordinary decision had quietly changed every life standing beside him. Olivia noticed him smiling and asked, "What are you thinking about?" Ethan looked toward the mountains before answering in the same calm voice that had guided him through every difficult season of life. "I was thinking that people spend so much time searching for miracles that they forget how they begin." The evening breeze carried the scent of pine through the quiet air as everyone stood together beneath the warm porch light. No one hurried to fill the silence, because every heart already understood the lesson that words could never fully explain. Sometimes the greatest blessing is not found in extraordinary wealth, remarkable success, or unexpected recognition. Sometimes it begins the moment one ordinary person chooses kindness when everyone else chooses to keep driving. And that quiet choice becomes the reason someone else finds hope, a family finds healing, and a house becomes a home once again.